The air in the Lycan Great Hall was a living entity. It pressed upon the skin with a cool, damp weight, thick with the scent of wet earth, of cold stone polished by generations of passing feet, and the underlying, ever-present musk of a power that was both animal and profoundly intelligent. It was a smell that spoke of forests under moonlight and territories defended with tooth and claw. I kept my gaze lowered, a fixed point on the rough grain of the oak table before me, my sole armor the drab gray wool of my human delegation's uniform, and the silent, desperate hope of invisibility. Welcome to the Passion Files. Today, we open a new story, a tale of a world not our own, where ancient laws and older magics shape the fate of kingdoms. Settle in, relax, and let us step through the veil. My hand moved with a will of its own, the charcoal pencil scratching a steady, looping shorthand onto the parchment. Border dispute, the Silver Run Valley. The Eastern Pack cedes hunting rights in exchange for mineral claims to the Ironfang Crags. The words were dry, administrative, a feeble dam against the tide of raw, primal energy that filled the cavernous space. Around me, the Lycan court was a symphony of restrained force. Nobles clad in silks the color of bruised twilight and deep forest shadows lounged with a predator's casual grace. Their conversations were a low hum, a vibration felt in the marrow more than heard by the ear. I was a ghost, a scribe, a recorder of events. I was not meant to be a participant. Yet, a sensation began to prickle at the nape of my neck, a heat that had nothing to do with the great fire roaring in the central pit. It was the weight of a stare so absolute it felt like a physical touch. My heart, a frantic bird against my ribs, stuttered. I dared, with infinitesimal slowness, to lift my eyes. King Valerius sat upon the great throne of intertwined roots and silver. He was not as I had imagined from human tales, not a brute draped in furs, but a sculpture of contained power. His hair, the color of a raven's wing, fell to broad shoulders clad in a tunic of storm-gray linen, simple against the ornate backdrop. But it was his eyes that held the court, and now they held me. They were not the warm amber of a hearth, nor the fierce yellow of a hunting wolf. They were the pale, piercing gray of a winter sky moments before the snow falls, clear, relentless, and utterly dispassionate as they surveyed his domain. And they were looking directly at me. A jolt, pure and electric, shot down my spine. I broke the contact instantly, my head bowing so low my chin nearly touched the parchment. A mistake. A foolish human mistake. Eye contact could be a challenge here, an invitation to a dance that ended only one way. I focused on the frantic rhythm of my own pulse, the sound roaring in my ears. You imagined it, I chastised myself, the scribe's logic battling the animal fear. He is the Lycan king. You are ink-stained furniture. The proceedings droned on. A petition about disputed fishing waters. A report of rogue bear sightings in the northern passes. I transcribed, my hand developing a faint tremor I forced to stillness. But the pressure of his gaze never wavered. It was a brand searing into the crown of my head. It traced the line of my jaw, the slope of my shoulder, the vulnerable column of my throat. When I stole another glance, a fleeting, terrified thing, his expression remained an unreadable mask of royal duty. Yet his eyes, in their storm-gray depths, a question flickered, a focus so intense it stripped away the gray wool and saw the trembling creature beneath. The final supplicant was dismissed. A reverent hush descended, deeper than before. This was the moment for the right of the twin thrones, where the king and queen would ascend the dais together, a symbol of unity to close the autumn equinox accords. Queen Isolde rose from her seat of woven silver branches. She was breathtaking, a masterpiece of lethal elegance. hair like liquid moonlight cascaded over robes of platinum silk that seemed woven from starlight and frost. She moved toward Valerius, her gait a ripple of controlled power, a smile gracing lips that promised kindness as sharp as a razor's edge. The court held its breath, awaiting the familiar, comforting ritual. Valerius stood. He did not take her proffered hand. A ripple, subtle as a shudder, passed through the assembled Lycans. Isolde's perfect smile did not falter, but it froze, becoming a porcelain facade, beautiful and utterly lifeless. He turned. The heavy pelt of his cloak, the fur of a great white wolf, whispered like a secret against the stone as he took one step, then two, down from the royal dais. He moved past the high tables of his stunned nobles, his path a straight, deliberate line that cut through the heart of the silent hall. My world shrank to the approaching tap of his boots on the flagstone. My pencil slipped from nerveless fingers. The sound of wood striking stone was a gunshot in the silence. Every head, every preternaturally sharp ear, swiveled toward the source of the noise, toward me. A scorching wave of humiliation turned my skin to fire. I fumbled for the pencil, my vision blurring, wishing the floor would open and swallow me, scribe, parchment, and all. A shadow fell across my table, blocking the flickering torchlight. I looked up. King Valerius stood before me. He loomed, not just in stature, but in presence, an ancient force contained in the shape of a man. The scent of him, crisp snow, aged leather, and something wild, something fundamentally other, washed over me, obliterating all other smells. My mind went blank, void of protocol, of fear, of coherent thought. Slowly, with a reverence that drew a collective gasp from the entire court, he knelt. Not a knight's genuflection on one knee. He went down on both, the act one of profound submission, bringing his terrifying, austerely beautiful face level with mine. The storm in his eyes had broken, and in its place was a raw, bewildering intensity that saw not the human scribe, but the soul within. His voice, when he spoke, did not boom. It was low, a vibration I felt in the very core of my bones, a tone meant for me alone, yet echoing in the pin-drop silence. For 3 centuries, he began, each word measured and inescapable. I have listened to the silence between my own heartbeats. I have felt a pull with the turning of every season, a thread tied to a star I could not see. I did not know its origin. I questioned its purpose. He reached out. I flinched, a purely human reflex. He paused, his large, capable hand hovering in the space between us. Then, with infinite care, his fingers did not touch my skin, but the simple, smooth wooden bead of the necklace my mother had given me, the only piece of beauty I owned. Today, the silence ended. The thread has found its anchor. I understand now. He rose then, a seamless uncoiling of contained power, and his voice expanded, filling the vast hall, leaving no room for doubt. "This human," he declared, and the word was not an insult but a sacrament, "is my fated mate. She is the answer to a song my blood has sung since my first breath. By the oldest laws of sky and forest, she is, and will be, your queen." Time stopped. Then, chaos detonated. A sound tore from Queen Isolde's throat. It was not a scream, nor a shout. It was a raw, guttural snarl of pure, undiluted betrayal that seemed to shake the very foundations of the hall. The beautiful porcelain of her face shattered into a mask of such venomous, icy hatred that those nearest to her recoiled as if from a physical blow. "Valerius!" The name was a curse, a blade hurled across the space. He did not look at her. His entire being, his formidable focus, remained on me. A wall between the hurricane of her rage and my fragile human form. The court erupted. Roars of outrage, cries of shock, the cacophonous scrape of chairs and benches as lords and ladies shot to their feet. Through the din, I sat trapped in my chair, Valerius's presence a bulwark before me. My body was stone. My mind was a white noise scream. Mate, queen, human. This was not happening. It was a scribe's fever dream, spun from exhaustion and the intoxicating, terrifying energy of the Lycan throne room. Valerius extended his hand to me once more, palm up. An invitation, a demand, a lifeline. Come, he said, and the command was softened by the lingering, awe-filled intensity in his eyes. You are under my protection now. Safe? The word echoed hollowly. I was in the eye of the greatest storm this realm had ever known, and its name was Isolde. My eyes, against all instinct, flickered over his shoulder. Isolde had mastered the initial explosion of her fury. She stood ramrod straight, her chest heaving. The hatred was still there, but it had been packed in glacial ice. Her pale blue eyes, chips of frozen lake, met mine across the tumultuous space. And in that look, she did not snarl. She did not shout. She promised. It was a silent, flawless vow of annihilation. A message etched in glacial fire and delivered directly to my soul. You may have him name you. You may wear the title he gives, but I will carve the reality from your flesh. I will never let you live to bear it. The king's hand remained, waiting. The court's chaos subsided into a breathless, anticipatory silence, waiting to see if the human mouse would dare take the proffered paw of the wolf king. My fingers, cold and numb as clay, uncurled from my lap. The story was no longer mine to observe and record from the shadows. The ledger had closed. A new, terrifying volume had been opened, and my name was scrawled across its first page in ink that felt like blood. It was mine to survive. And as my trembling fingertips finally, irrevocably, brushed against the shocking, vital warmth of Valerius's palm, I knew with a certainty that chilled me deeper than any fear. The prologue had just ended in a declaration of war. The silence in the hidden passage was profound, broken only by the soft scuff of my worn boots and the whisper of Valerius's cloak against stone. His hand, which had enveloped mine in the hall, was not what I expected. It was not the cold, clawed weapon of monster stories, but solid, warm, and real, marked by the calluses of a warrior familiar with sword hilts and scepters alike. His grip was an anchor, the only stable point in a universe that had just tilted off its axis. He did not lead me back toward the roaring chaos of the great hall, but deeper into the palace's secret veins. A tapestry depicting a great hunt was swept aside, and he ushered me into a dim, cool corridor, lit by flickering sconces. The last thing I saw was Isolde's face, a perfect mask of outraged dignity, her ice-blue eyes boring into my retreating form until the heavy fabric fell back, severing her gaze. Where are we going? My voice was a fragile thing, barely recognizable. Away from the spectacle, he replied, his tone flat, stripped of its former public resonance. To a place where you can gather yourself. Gather myself. I repeated the words, a hollow, disbelieving sound caught in my throat. You declared me your mate, he finished, the words simple and devastating. He stopped and turned to face me in the narrow passage. In the confined space, his presence was overwhelming. I could see the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the unyielding line of his jaw. You felt it, in the hall, before I ever knelt. The pull. The recognition. I wanted to deny it, to scream that I had felt nothing but terror, but I couldn't. The memory of his gaze, that magnetic, terrifying focus that had pinned me long before he moved, was its own undeniable truth. A truth I didn't understand and desperately feared. I felt stared at. I whispered, a weak deflection. A faint, almost imperceptible shift touched his lips. You felt seen. There is a world of difference. He resumed walking, slower now. My kind are bound by laws deeper than politics, laws of blood and fate. For 3 centuries I felt nothing. I thought the fated bond a myth, a story for ballads. Until today. The moment you entered the hall, and the scent of ink and lavender cut through the incense and ambition. Lavender. The simple soap from my boarding house. A cheap human scent. So it's a scent? I asked, my scribe's mind latching onto the clinical, desperate to categorize the uncategorizable. It is a resonance, he said, searching for words that could bridge the chasm between our kinds. A note in a silent song only I can hear, finally found. It is the echo of your heartbeat within my own. It is a knowing, beyond reason, that the quiet space I have carried inside me has a shape, and it is yours. His words were beautiful. They painted a prison of poetry around me, magnificent and inescapable. We emerged into a small, secluded courtyard open to the twilight sky. A single ancient willow wept graceful tendrils into a dark, still pool. It was a world away from the roaring hall, a pocket of serenity. He led me to a stone bench. Sit, please. I sat, the cold of the granite seeping through my wool skirts. He released my hand, and the absence of his touch felt strangely like a loss, which frightened me more than his grip had. He paced a few steps, a restless predator, before turning back. You are in danger, he stated. No poetry now, only grim fact. Isolde is not merely insulted. She is usurped. Her power, her legacy, her very identity was stripped from her before the entire realm. She will see your existence as a wrong that can only be made right by your removal. The bluntness was a bracing slap. Then why do it that way? The question burst from me, tinged with a spark of anger. Why not send for me privately? Something less catastrophic? His gray eyes held mine, unwavering. Because our laws are also public. A fated bond, declared before the assembled pack under the open sky, is inviolable. It is the highest law, above treaties, above royal lineage. By declaring it thus, I invoked a protection for you that even she cannot openly breach without breaking the sacred trust of all Lycans. It ties her hands, even as it sharpens her resolve. A strategic move. I was a political pawn, elevated by a mystical law. The cold realization settled in my stomach. So I'm a symbol. A sacred, untouchable symbol. For the first time, a flicker of what looked like pain crossed his features. You are my mate, he said, the word vibrating with a depth of feeling that contradicted the strategy. The bond is not a tactic. It is a truth. Using its laws to shield you is what I must do. It is the only way to keep you breathing while you learn the rhythm of this new world. Learn to be a target, you mean? To be queen, he said. And the simplicity of it was the most terrifying thing of all. Before I could form a response, a soft sound came from the archway. A young woman stood there, her head bowed. She was Lycan, but slighter than the others, her ears pointed delicately. Her hands, clasped before her, were marked by old silvery scars. My king, she said, her voice melodic yet tinged with nerves. The former queen's attendants have prepared the moonstone suite for the lady. Valerius's jaw tightened. The sunstone suite, he corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. On the royal floor, not Isolde's old apartments. The maid's eyes widened. But sire, the sunstone suite adjoins your own. I am aware. See it done. This is Anya. She will attend you. He gestured to the maid. She is under my personal protection. You may trust her. Anya dared a glance at me, her eyes a soft hazel, There was no hatred there, only a deep, weary apprehension and a flicker of curiosity. I found myself giving her the smallest tentative nod. Valerius turned back to me. I must go and address the political tempest I have summoned. Anya will take you to your rooms. Rest. The doors will be guarded by my personal sentinels. You are safe within those walls. He said it like an incantation, a charm against the darkness. But as he left, his broad back disappearing into the shadowed corridor, the word safe echoed hollowly. Isolde's ice-blue promise was a more potent memory than any guard's spear. Anya approached. My lady, if you would follow me? The walk to the Sunstone Suite was a journey through a dream of opulent terror. We passed tapestries that told stories of great hunts and mythic battles in threads of gold and crimson. Portraits of stern-faced Lycans with Valerius's stormy eyes watched our progress from gilded frames. Vaulted ceilings soared into darkness, designed to humble, and they succeeded. We climbed a grand, spiraling staircase where two hulking guards in silver-chased armor stood at attention. They bowed their heads as I passed, their sense of oiled steel and fresh pine momentarily cutting through my fog of fear. Finally, Anya opened a set of double doors carved with intricate celestial maps. The Sunstone Suite was not a room. It was an expanse. A vast chamber of pale gold marble, its floors warmed by thick rugs in cream and sapphire. Walls of creamy silk were broken by windows taller than ancient trees, framing a breathtaking view of the moon-drenched forested mountains. A fireplace large enough to stable a horse held a cheerful, crackling blaze. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen, and it felt, utterly and completely, like a gilded cage. A bath has been drawn, my lady, Anya said, gesturing to an archway from which steam drifted enticingly. And I took the liberty of having a light supper laid by the fire. It is simple. Broth, bread, winter apples. My stomach churned at the thought of food. Thank you, Anya. She moved to follow me into the bathing chamber. Please, I said, the word coming out sharper than intended. I softened my tone. I would like a moment alone. Just to breathe. She paused, then nodded. Of course. I will be in the outer vestibule if you ring. She indicated a silken pull cord by the impossibly large canopied bed. The king's guards are at the main doors. When she left, closing the inner door with a soft, definitive click, the silence of the suite rushed in. It was a heavy, watchful silence. I stood in the center of the impossible room, arms wrapped around myself. My gaze fell on the small table by the fire. A silver tray, a porcelain bowl, a crust of dark bread, and a crystal goblet filled with wine the color of rubies. Next to the tray, looking profoundly out of place, was a small, plain pottery vase. In it was a single, perfect sprig of lavender. My breath caught. A message. From him. A fragile thread of kindness in this terrifying tapestry. Driven by a need for something familiar, I walked to the table. The broth smelled of herbs and rich meat. My hand reached for the goblet. The crystal was cold and heavy. I brought it to my lips, the rich, fruity aroma of blackberries and oak filling my nostrils. And there, beneath it, so faint a human nose would never have detected it, was another scent. Bitter. Metallic. Like almonds and polished copper. My hand froze. The memory of Isolde's glacial promise flashed before my eyes. I will never let you live. She couldn't break the sacred law openly. But a tragic accident? A human, overwhelmed and perhaps seeking solace, partaking too freely of the unfamiliar Lycan vintage? A sudden, mysterious ailment in the night? The goblet trembled in my hand. I set it down, the clink absurdly loud in the silent room. My heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs. This was it. The first move. Not a claw in the dark, but a poisoned chalice in a gilded room, delivered with a smile. I looked at the lavender sprig, his promise of care and remembrance. I looked at the wine, her promise of a quiet, deniable end. They sat side by side on the same small table. The bond might be a resonance. The law might be a shield. But this war? This war was going to be fought in whispers and hidden smells, in the space between kindness and cruelty. A soft knock at the inner door made my spine straighten. "Come in." Anya entered, her eyes immediately going to the full goblet on the table, then to my face. She saw the fear I could not fully hide. "Is the supper not to your liking, my lady?" I forced my lips into the approximation of a smile. "The broth is fine. The wine is not to my taste. Too heavy." "Could you remove it?" Her gaze held mine for a fraction too long. She was not surprised. "Of course," she said smoothly, gliding forward. She picked up the goblet without spilling a drop. "I will bring you water from the mountain spring. It is very clear, very pure." As she turned to leave, I spoke. "Anya." She paused. "Yes, my lady?" "The lavender. Was that your doing?" A slight hesitation. "No, my lady. The king sent it. He said you might appreciate a reminder of home." He was trying. In his blunt, overwhelming way, he was trying. "And the wine?" I asked, the question a bare whisper. Her face became a careful, neutral mask, but her eyes were old and knowing. "The suite was prepared by the chamberlain's staff, my lady, under the former queen's household direction." She gave me a look that was both a warning and a subtle offer of alliance. "It will be seen to. I will attend to everything myself from now on." With that, she left, taking the poisoned wine with her. I sank into the chair by the fire, the warmth not reaching the cold knot that had taken root in my chest. Valerius had given me guards, a fortress of a room, a sprig of lavender. But Isolde had just given me my first, vital lesson. In this palace, the most potent poison often came cloaked in courtesy, and survival would mean learning to distrust everything, especially the things meant to bring comfort. The silence after Anya left was a living, watchful thing. It pressed against the soaring walls of the sunstone suite, broken only by the erratic, whispering crackle of the great fire. I did not move from the chair. The cold that had settled in my bones had little to do with the chill of the marble floor. It was the icy dread of understanding. Isolde's war would not be fought with roars in the throne room. It would be waged here, in the quiet spaces between breaths, in the objects meant for comfort. The lavender sprig, now a symbol of both care and cruel manipulation, sat wilting in its simple vase. I stared at it, my scribe's mind, trained to record, to categorize, struggling to process a reality where a king's kindness could be so seamlessly twisted into a queen's weapon. "I will attend to everything myself from now on," Anya had said. It was a vow, but also a confirmation of the pervasive rot. The chamberlain's staff, the invisible hands that made the palace run, were still loyal to their former mistress. I was surrounded. Sleep was a futile concept. Every shift of the heavy silk curtains in the mountain breeze sounded like a stealthy footfall. Every distant muffled echo from the corridor beyond the double doors was a potential threat solidifying. I spent the hours until dawn not in the vast, intimidating bed, but curled in the high-backed chair pulled close to the hearth, my mother's wooden bead necklace clasped tightly in one hand, my senses stretched to their limits. A gray, pre-dawn light was finally leaching the depth from the shadows when a firm, authoritative knock echoed through the suite. It was not Anya's soft tap. The door opened to reveal two maids I had never seen. Their faces were smooth and expressionless as river stones, their gowns crisp and simple, but they carried with them the faint, cloying scent of winter roses, Isolde's signature perfume. It was a deliberate provocation, a message worn on their very skin. "The king requests your presence in the West Solar for the morning council," the taller one stated, her voice devoid of inflection. She did not call me "my lady." Her gaze fixed on a point somewhere above my left shoulder. "You are to be appropriately attired." They advanced, laying out a gown of dove-gray velvet on the bed. It was beautiful in its simplicity, but it was a color meant to fade into the background, to make me look like a pale, timid ghost next to the memory of Isolde's dazzling brilliance. "Where is Anya?" I asked, forcing my voice to steadiness. "Reassigned," the shorter maid said, not looking at me as she smoothed the gown. "We are here to serve you now." The thought of their perfumed hands on me, of being vulnerable under their ministrations, sent a spike of primal revulsion through me. "I will dress myself," I said, the words firmer than I felt. The tall maid's eyes flicked to mine, a flash of surprise and disdain. "The gown laces at the back, my lady." The title was a bare syllable, stripped of respect. "Then I will manage." I walked to the bed and picked up the heavy, soft fabric. It was a prison uniform of a different sort. "You may leave." A tense silence stretched. They had their orders, undoubtedly from the chamberlain, to unsettle me, to remind me of my place and my dependence. My refusal was a tiny, brittle act of defiance. After a charged moment, they dipped into shallow, synchronized curtsies and left without another word. The victory felt hollow. Lacing the gown myself was a frustrating, contorted struggle, my arms aching from the unnatural angle. I left my hair loose, a dark fall against the pale gray. I looked exactly as they intended, a small, overwhelmed human, adrift in borrowed finery. The guard outside my door, Wren, he had grunted his name the night before, escorted me through the waking palace. His presence, a solid wall of birch and steel scent, was my only comfort. The West Solar was a long, glass-walled room overlooking the mist-cloaked training yards. The first barks of drill commands and the wooden clack of practice swords echoed up from below. King Valerius stood at the window, a broad silhouette against the brightening sky. He turned as I entered, and for a fleeting instant, something unguarded flickered in his storm-gray eyes, a complex mix of appraisal and concern. It was gone before I could name it, replaced by a mask of regal calm. "You are well?" he asked. "I am here," I replied. It was the only honest answer. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "A foundation." He gestured to a heavy chair beside a large table strewn with maps and scrolls. "I would have you observe. It is important you begin to understand the currents you now navigate." "As a sailor?" I asked, taking the seat. "Or as cargo?" He studied me. "That, little one, remains to be seen." The lords filed in. They were a different breed from the courtiers of the previous evening. Older, harder, their faces etched with the concerns of land and border, not courtly intrigue. Their scents were of parchment, cold steel, and the soil of their distant territories. Their reactions to my presence were a study in controlled Lycan discipline. Veiled curiosity, blunt dismissal, a few simmering glances of resentment. I kept my eyes on the maps, my scribe's mind instinctively tracing borderlines and river routes, finding solace in the familiar language of geography. The council began. Reports on granary yields from the southern valleys, a dispute over logging rights in a shared forest, updates on the migration patterns of sky eels. It was mundane, vital. Then Lord Gavril, a bear of a man with a voice like grinding rock, slammed a meaty fist on the table. "This is a farce," he boomed, his yellow-tinged eyes cutting toward me. "We debate the realm's sustenance and safety while its very heart is compromised. A human at the king's side? It is a vulnerability our rivals will scent from 100 leagues." The room went still. Valerius did not move, but the air around him grew dense, colder. "The heart of the realm, Gavril," he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "Beats where I command it to. Your concern is noted. Now, the sky eel migration. Do they threaten the coastal villages or not?" It was a magnificent deflection, a show of absolute authority, but it also painted the target on my chest in bolder strokes. I was the king's declared weakness. After the council, Valerius was waylaid by a grim-faced captain. He glanced at me, frustration tightening the line of his jaw. "Ren will see you back. I have a matter that requires my attention." Ren led me not through the interior corridors, but onto a wide, open balcony that connected this wing to the next. It was a breathtaking shortcut, a ribbon of stone hanging over a dizzying drop to the formal gardens below, edged by a chest-high balustrade of ancient, weathered granite. The morning sun was warm on my face, the view of the awakening palace grounds momentarily stunning. "The king thought you might appreciate the air," Ren said, taking a post by the doorway we'd exited. I walked to the balustrade, placing my hands on the cool, rough stone. For the first time since entering this world, I drew a deep breath that wasn't tainted by fear or perfume. It was clean, sharp with pine and high altitude. I looked down at the geometric patterns of the hedges, the tiny figures of gardeners far below. A fragile moment of peace. Then I heard it, not from behind me, but from within the stone itself. A sharp, crisp crack, like ice splitting underfoot. The section of balustrade directly under my palms shuddered. Time seemed to slow, then fracture. The solid granite didn't just crumble. It exploded outward in a burst of dust and shards, as if its very heart had been turned to sand. One moment I was leaning on immutable rock. The next I was pitching forward into empty, screaming air. The ground a lethal mosaic far below. A roar tore through the fabric of the morning. Not of stone, but of pure, undiluted fury. A blur of gray and black. Valerius. He hadn't left. He'd been watching from a shadowed archway, the bond-choked cord of his awareness keeping him tethered. He moved with a speed that defied physics, not toward me, but past me, launching himself over the collapsing edge. His body crashed into the sheer palace wall below the balcony's lip, and I heard a sickening, metallic screech as claws of terrifying length and sharpness punched deep into the mortar between the ancient stones. He braced himself, a living, breathing platform in the void. I fell, not to the distant earth, but onto him. The impact drove the breath from my lungs. His free arm locked around my waist, a band of forged iron, crushing me against the cold, unyielding plane of his chest. For one eternal second, we hung there, suspended between sky and earth. His claws sunk deep into the wall, his breaths coming in ragged, furious gusts against my temple. He looked down at me, his face a mask of primal ferocity. "Do not move." The command vibrated through his body into mine. With a grunt of immense strain, he began to climb. One clawed hand ripped free, found a new purchase higher up, hauled us upward. The other followed. It was a brutal, terrifying ascent. Chips of stone hailed down, his muscles corded and bunched under me, a testament to impossible strength. In moments that felt like hours, he thrust me back over the intact edge of the balcony onto solid ground, then vaulted up after me. Ren was there, his face ashen, sword drawn as he scanned the empty balcony. "Sire, I saw no one." Valerius ignored him. He was on me, his hands running over my arms, my shoulders, his touch frantic. "Are you hurt? Speak to me." I could only shake my head, my body trembling violently, the world a tilting, spinning blur. The fear was a delayed explosion, now detonating in every nerve ending. His panic morphed into a wrath so absolute it seemed to chill the very sunlight. He turned to the crumbled section of balustrade, kneeling in the debris. He picked up a large, fractured piece of granite, and then he did something I didn't expect. He brought it to his face and inhaled deeply. His head jerked up, his eyes finding mine. They were no longer gray, but a blazing, luminous silver, the eyes of the wolf, fully unveiled. "It was cut," he said, the words dropping like stones into the sudden, terrible silence. From beneath, a clean surgical line, weakened to hold just long enough. He rose, dropping the stone. It shattered into dust at his feet. This was no accident of age. This was an execution, written in stone. The truth landed, heavier than the granite, colder than the fall. Isolde's promise. She hadn't waited. She'd moved from subtle poison to ruthless physics. A tragic public accident. A clumsy human, leaning on old, neglected stone. My death would have been a regrettable footnote. A lesson in the fragility of my kind. Valerius looked from the broken edge to me, his silvered gaze holding a new, horrifying understanding. His laws, his guards, his bond, they were a net with holes. The war wasn't coming. It was here. And it was fought with smiles and saws, with perfume and terrifying precision. He took a step toward me, the predator in him riding right under his skin. "From this moment," he vowed, his voice a low, seismic tremor that promised not comfort, but a reckoning. "Nothing touches you. No one approaches you. No food, no drink, no stone comes near you without passing through my hands first. Do you understand?" I understood. The gilded cage had just become a fortress under direct siege, and I, the prize to be protected, finally understood my role with stark clarity. I was no longer just a mate, or a political symbol. I was the living, breathing battleground. The dust from the shattered balustrade seemed to hang in the air, a gritty taste of mortality. Valerius's vow, "Nothing touches you," wasn't a promise of safety, but the declaration of a new, more rigid reality. His grip on my arm was the only solid point in a world that had just proven its floors could be made of air. He didn't speak as Ren cleared a path, his guards forming a wall of steel and solemn faces around us. We moved not toward the Sunstone Suite, but deeper into the heart of the royal wing, to a set of doors I had never seen. He shouldered them open. These were his private chambers. They were nothing like the opulent, impersonal grandeur of my rooms. This was a space of function and formidable presence. The walls were dark, seasoned wood, hung with maps drawn on thick parchment and the simple, elegant forms of ancestral weapons, not for decoration, but for use. A massive desk groaned under neat stacks of reports and scrolls. A wide, unadorned window looked north toward the distant, saw-toothed mountains. It smelled overwhelmingly of him. Snow, worn leather, iron, and the crisp, clean scent of cedar. It was the den of the Wolf King, and he had just brought the rabbit inside. He released me finally, and the absence of his touch left me unsteady. "You cannot return to the Sunstone Suite," he stated, pacing a short, tight line before the cold fireplace. "Its accesses are too many, its servants unknown. You will remain here. The adjoining door will stay open. My personal guard will become yours. You will learn to recognize each of them by sight, by step, by scent." The idea was as terrifying as the fall. To live here, in the intimate heart of his power, surrounded by the evidence of his rule. Is that wise? "It is necessary," he countered, his gaze pinning me. "The bond between us is a tether I can feel over distance. It is how I knew to watch the balcony. That tether is shorter here. It is a quicker warning. The only thing faster would be you wearing my skin." He said it with no poetry, only stark biology. Furthermore, no one loyal to Isolde has worked these rooms for years. It is the one place in this palace I control absolutely. It was a surrender of his last bastion of privacy. A king inviting a weapon, a vulnerability, directly into his armory. "And Anya?" I asked, the name a whisper in the austere room. A shadow passed over his face. Reassigning a maid is within the former queen's purview. To countermand it openly over a human would be seen as a catastrophic weakness. It would undermine my authority for what they would call a whim. He spat the word. But she is not unprotected. I will find her. And she has her own eyes and ears. He left me then to confront the aftermath. A storm cloud moving to interrogate masons and stewards. I was alone in the heart of his power. The silence here was different. A guarded, vigilant quiet. I walked to the window, looking out at the same view from a higher, more severe angle. My mind replayed the crack, the lurch, the crushing safety of his arms. I was not safe. I would never be safe. But I was no longer passive. My eyes fell on his desk. Amid the orderly chaos of state, a single object lay apart. A slender, unadorned dagger in a plain leather sheath. It was not ornate. It was a tool. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, perfectly balanced. I slid the blade free. The steel whispered, catching the cold northern light in a thin, cruel line. I did not put it down. Deep in the servants' warren, beneath the palace, Anya scrubbed. Her hands, already red and marked by old silvery scars, were plunged into water so hot it turned her skin an angry pink. She scoured the crusted base of a cauldron large enough to boil a whole stag. The reassignment was not lateral. It was a demolition. From the sunstone suite to the main scullery, where the heat was a physical weight, and the work broke spirit and body alike. The head cook, a burly Lycan with a permanent sneer, watched her. "Fancy hands for the king's pet too delicate now, eh? Back where you belong, Scorchmark." She did not look up. She kept scrubbing, but her ears, the delicate pointed ears the purebloods mocked, twitched, filtering the kitchen's roar. She listened to the gossip flying on the steam. Balcony in the west wing just crumbled. Heard the king himself leapt like something out of a legend to catch her. They say she walked away. Uncanny. Stone wasn't rotten. Master Mason's been summoned. The king's in a black fury. Anya's scrubbing slowed. The attack had happened. And it had failed. The human was alive. Valerius was enraged. This was good. This changed things. A young scullery maid, a mouse-faced girl, sidled up to the next tub, whispering as she scrubbed pots. "They say the Sunstone maid was sent down here. That true?" Anya gave a minute nod. The girl's eyes darted. "My cousin serves in the linen press near the Lady Isolde's old solar. She says there was a gathering last night. After the wine didn't work." The girl's voice dropped to a breath. They were laughing, talking about testing the integrity of old stonework. A mason's apprentice was there. He left with a heavy purse. Anya stopped scrubbing. She looked at the girl, really looked. She saw not curiosity, but fear, and a desperate need to be rid of a secret. "The apprentice's name?" Anya murmured, the sound lost in the splash of water. The girl swallowed. "Jarek, works under Master Boren." Anya rinsed her hands, the old burns aching. Information was a currency more valuable than coin in these walls. She had just been paid, and she knew exactly to whom this debt needed to be delivered. Not through the guarded doors of the royal wing, but through the secret, silent channels only the scarred and the forgotten knew. She had been removed from the human's side, but her war, it seemed, had just begun. Back in the king's chambers, the dagger was a cold, patient weight against my thigh. I had fashioned a crude sheath from a strip of leather, tying it high under the simple, dark tunic that had replaced the gray gown. Clothing of his, smelling of him. It felt less like wearing borrowed clothes and more like wearing a second, unfamiliar skin. Valerius returned as dusk bled into night, his expression carved from granite. The mason, Borin, is clean, terrified but loyal. His apprentice, Jarek, is missing, vanished from the city. He said it while unstrapping a vambrace, his movements sharp with controlled anger. The stone was cut with a diamond-tipped saw from his own shed. The work was precise. He was teaching me, I realized, including me in the aftermath. They removed Anya first, I said, the pieces connecting. To clear the way. The maids this morning smelled of Isolde's perfume. They wanted me alone, unsettled, without my one ally. It was a sequence. He paused, looking at me with that sharp, assessing focus. You are correct. It was approval, grim and hard-won. Isolde has always been a strategist. She fights on multiple fronts. A guard servant brought food. A simple tray he inspected minutely before allowing it near me. As we ate in silence, he laid out the new rules. My world was to shrink to this suite, its population whittled down to a handful of named guards, him and me. I need to work, I said, the words breaking the silence. He frowned. You have your studies, the dagger. I need to work, I insisted, the scribe in me, the part that had defined me long before I was a mate, rising up. My hands, my mind, purpose, not just practice. Idleness is a vulnerability she can exploit. What work? He asked, his gaze analytical. The archives. Silas is old, his system is chaos. I could organize it. Create a true index. You control the access. I go with you or Ren. I touch only my own tools, brought from here. But I do something. It was a tiny push against the wall of his protection. A plea for a thread of the person I had been. He was silent, then gave a single nod. 1 hour a day, under my eye or Ren's, your own parchment, your own ink. You touch only what you bring. It was a victory, brittle and small. Thank you. Later, in the deep quiet, the dagger under my pillow and the sounds of him moving in the next room a strangely comforting rhythm, I understood the new shape of things. The balcony had been a lesson in the language of stone. Now I had to learn the grammar of this gilded, deadly world. I had a knife, a room, and an hour of borrowed purpose. The siege was absolute. But within it, I had just begun to build my own tiny fortress. The dagger, now a familiar secret against my thigh, was a cold anchor in a world of shifting threats. For 3 days, the king's chambers were my entire universe, a gilded, guarded cell within the larger prison of the palace. Valerius was a force of contained tempests, coming and going at all hours, his presence a tangible shift in the air, a pressure change. He would bring me reports, his voice a low, clipped commentary as his finger traced river routes on maps. The apprentice, Jarek, is gone, likely fled or found in a ditch. The tool was his. The work was professional. His words were etched in frustration. Each dead end was a victory for the shadow we fought. He taught me the guards. Wren, birch and cold steel. Kale, frost and granite. Torvin, earth and damp leaves. I learned their footfalls before a knock, to separate their scents from the 100 others that seeped under the door. They were my silent sentinels, their eyes avoiding mine not from disdain, but from a hyper-vigilance that scanned the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. The true lesson, however, was the bond. It was no longer a silent, terrifying mystery, but a living thread of wordless communication. I felt the hot coil of his rage in my own stomach when a courtier's report implied the balcony's failure was fortuitous. I felt the sharp pull of his focus, taut as a bowstring during council. And once, in the deepest hour of night, I woke from a dream of falling into nothingness to feel a wave of deliberate, calming purpose radiating from the other side of the open adjoining door. His silent answer to my terror. On the fourth morning, he did not leave immediately after our shared silent breakfast. "Today," he announced, his gaze resting on me with heavy intent, "you take a step outside." A jolt of pure animal fear shot through me. The memory of stone turning to dust under my palms was visceral. The bond flickered with his recognition of my fear, but his resolve was a granite wall. "A calculated risk," he continued. "You cannot live forever within these four walls. That is what she wants. To shrink your world until you are a phantom, and then a memory. We will walk to the royal archives. The path is controlled, with no balconies, no unscreened staff. And," he added, watching me closely, "it is a place of knowledge. Your domain, is it not?" The archives. The word was a key turning in a rusty lock inside my chest. Knowledge. Parchment. The solid, predictable logic of recorded fact. A place where things could be understood, not just survived. "Yes," I said, the word more breath than sound. The walk was a military operation. Ren and Torvin ahead, Valerius at my side, Kale behind. We moved through corridors that had been cleared, past doors that were closed and guarded. The few courtiers we passed froze, then offered deep, wary bows. Their eyes wide as they took in the human scribe flanked by the king and his wolves. The air was thick with a cacophony of perfumes, spices, and musk. I kept my eyes forward, my hand unconsciously brushing the hidden dagger through the fabric of my trousers. The royal archives were a cathedral of silence. Soaring ceilings of dark wood, endless shelves of scrolls and leather-bound codices stretching into cool, dusty gloom. Tall, narrow windows cast bars of muted light across flagstones worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps. The head archivist, the wizened Lycan named Silas with spectacles perched on his long nose, nearly folded himself in half with a bow. "My king, my lady." His voice was a dry rustle of parchment. "The collection is at your disposal." "Leave us," Valerius said. "See that we are not disturbed." As Silas scurried away, the immense quiet of the place seemed to swallow the guards. Valerius led me to a large, scarred reading table near a window. "I must meet with the border lords. Ren will remain at the door. Kyle will be inside. There." He pointed to a shadowed alcove near a shelf of military histories. "You have 1 hour. Use it." He left, and his departure made the archive feel vaster, emptier. I stood, paralyzed for a moment by the sheer weight of knowledge, by the terrifying freedom of it. Then, the scribe in me awoke. I went to the nearest shelf. Histories of the Lycan clans, treatises on border wars, genealogies. My fingers trailed over spines until one title caught my eye. On the nature of the fated bond, myth and legal precedent. My heart stuttered. I carried the heavy volume to the table. The script was archaic but decipherable. It spoke of the bond not as poetry, but as a convergence of souls, a predestined resonance that superseded all mortal laws. Accounts of kings abdicating for low-born mates, of wars halted when bondmates faced each other on opposite sides. It was described as a force of nature, undeniable and absolute. A chill that had nothing to do with the cool air crept down my spine. This wasn't romantic lore. This was their constitution. I was not a woman. I was a natural disaster that had walked into their court. I read, lost in a daze of terrifying legalities. The silence was so complete I could hear the settling of the ancient wood. It was a trick, of course. The silence was a blanket, muffling other sounds. It was why I heard the whisper. It was faint. A mere disturbance of air from the high balcony that ringed the second level of shelves. A susurration of fabric, the softest scuff of a boot. Not Kale. His scent of frost and granite was anchored in his alcove. This came from the opposite side. I did not look up. I kept my eyes on the page, my breathing even, but every sense sharpened to a needlepoint. The bond was a quiet hum. Valerius was distant, but not alarmed. This was my trial. The whisper came again, closer. Not words. A breath shaping a single, sibilant note. A shh. It was not a call for silence. It was a taunt. A reminder. Slowly, as if stretching from long study, I raised my head and let my gaze wander idly across the upper balcony. I saw nothing but shadows and leather spines. But then, a current of air from the palace's ancient ventilation system brought a scent to my nose. Faint, almost erased by dust and age, but unmistakable. Lily of the valley and frost. Isolde's perfume. My blood turned to ice. She was here. Or one of her specters was, moving like a ghost among the histories, watching me in my supposed sanctuary. I looked toward Kale's alcove. He was a statue, his back to me, watching the main door. He hadn't heard. The whisper had been for me alone. A new, cold clarity washed through me. Reading about the bond would not save me. Understanding legal precedent was useless against a whisper in the dark. I needed a different kind of knowledge. I closed the book on the faded bond. I walked to a different section, one labeled Applied Sciences, Engineering and Materials. I found what I sought: structural principles of stone and mortar. Then, the properties of northern granite, and a smaller, denser text, common tools of the mason's trade. I carried them back to the table, a new purpose steadying my hands. If they used stone as a weapon, I would learn its language. I would learn how it was cut, how it could fail, how to spot the weakness before it could be exploited. As I opened the first text to a diagram of load-bearing arches, the shadow on the balcony above me melted away. The scent of perfume faded, leaving only dust and ink. But the message was received. She could reach me anywhere. And my response would not be to cower. It would be to study, to learn the battlefield down to its constituent parts. When Valerius returned to collect me, his eyes went immediately to the new stack of books before me, their subjects plain. He said nothing, but as we walked back, the bond hummed with a new note. A fierce, grim approval. The game had changed again. I was no longer just a battleground. I was a student of war, and my first lesson had been delivered in a whisper. I would not fail the next test. The knowledge from the archives was a cold armor. For days, I lived between the austere safety of Valerius's chambers and the silent stacks, my world a narrow corridor of stone and parchment. I learned the granular composition of the palace granite, the weak veins of feldspar that ran through it like fatal flaws. I studied diagrams of keystones and load-bearing walls, understanding now how a single, precise cut could bring tons of stone crashing down. The diamond-tipped saw from Jarek's shed was listed on page 43 of Common Tools of the Mason's Trade. Its cutting depth and required pressure were meticulous facts. This knowledge didn't stop the fear, but it forged it into something harder. A focused, analytical wariness. Valerius watched this transformation. He'd find me at his desk, his own reports pushed aside, my fingers stained with ink from tracing stress diagrams. He said nothing, but the bond thrummed with a complex chord: approval, concern, and a profound, simmering rage that this was necessary. On the third evening, the summons came. Not through a maid, but through Wren, his birch and steel scent sharp with unspoken tension. The king requests your presence in the Amber Hall. A small gathering. Border lords from the southern marches. He believes it is time. Time. The word hung between us. Time to be a symbol. Time to be seen as more than a rumor hiding in the king's rooms. Time to be bait, my mind whispered treacherously. I looked at my borrowed, practical clothes. I am not dressed for a hall. Attire has been provided, Ren said, gesturing to the bed. Laid upon the dark wool was a dress. It was not Lycan in style, no heavy velvets or metallic brocades. It was of a deep, forest green silk, simply cut with long sleeves and a high neck. It was elegant, dignified, and it would perfectly cover the dagger strapped to my thigh. A human dress, in a Lycan hall. A statement. Valerius was waiting. His gaze swept over me, a quick assessing glance. Green suits you. It is the color of the deep woods, of resilience. He offered his arm. Stay close, say little. Observe everything. The amber hall was intimate, lit by a central fire pit and hundreds of candles. The air was rich with the smell of roasting meat, spiced wine, and the earthy, travel-worn scent of the 5 border lords and their mates. Conversation died as we entered. Valerius seated me at the high table, in the empty chair beside his own, a silent, screaming reminder of Isolde's absence. I felt the weight of every stare. Curious, hostile, calculating. The meal began. Servants, all male, all bearing the distinct scent of the royal guard in temporary livery, brought platters. Valerius took a portion of everything first, ate it, and waited a full minute before nodding for a portion to be served to me. A blatant, powerful display. The message was clear. My body is her shield. The southern lords were blunt, practical men. Their talk was of drought-resistant crops and minor border skirmishes. Their distrust of me was a tangible chill, but they were more wary of offending Valerius. Their mates, sharp-eyed Lycan women, watched me with a different intensity, measuring me as a female in their hierarchy. One, Lady Mirren, with braided silver hair and eyes like flint, addressed me. And do the human territories have issue with blight on their root vegetables? Her tone placed humans and vegetables on similar footing. I met her gaze. A particular mildew, yes. It thrives in damp storage. We found scattering dried bitterroot among the harvest absorbs the excess moisture and prevents its spread. A beat of surprised silence. Lady Mirren blinked. Bitterroot. It is plentiful in the southern crags. It is, I agreed softly. It wasn't diplomacy. It was data. But it shifted something. The conversation, stiff and forced, began to flow a little easier. Valerius said nothing, but I felt a pulse of warm satisfaction through the bond. Then came the dessert. A towering confection of spun sugar and honeyed berries. The head cook himself, a florid-faced Lycan named Borin, was brought out to receive praise. He bowed, his eyes flicking to me once, nervously. He smelled of garlic, thyme, and a faint, sour anxiety. Valerius performed the ritual. He took the first slice, ate, waited. The bond was calm. He nodded. A slice was served to me, the berries glistening like jewels. I lifted my spoon. The sweet, cloying scent of the honey was overwhelming, but beneath it, a bright, almost citrusy hint. It reminded me of the cleaning tinctures used on the archive's woodwork. I paused, the spoon halfway to my lips. I glanced at Valerius. He was watching me, his expression neutral, but his eyes alert. The bond remained placid. He had tasted it. He felt nothing. But he was Lycan. His biology was a fortress. Mine was not. The memory of the wine, the bitter almond scent hidden by fruit, was a flash of ice. Isolde was a strategist. She would adapt. The first poison was for a human, detectable. What if this one wasn't? What if it was something a Lycan system would barely notice, but would unravel a human's over hours? All this unfolded in a second. To refuse the king's tasted food would be a colossal insult, a public shredding of his protection. I made a show of savoring the aroma, then set the spoon down with a soft clink. I turned to Valerius. My king, it smells exquisite, but the honey is so rich, after such a meal. I fear my human constitution is too delicate. Would it offend if I took but a berry? A flicker in his eyes. Not offense. Sharp, undeniable interest. He saw my hesitation. Of course not, he said, his voice a private rumble. He raised it for the hall. The lady finds our sweets too bold for her blood. Bring her a plain bowl of whipped cream. He was giving me an out. But as he spoke, his hand dropped below the table and found my wrist. His fingers pressed against my frantic pulse. He felt the rabbit beat of my suspicion. The dessert was cleared. The evening wound down. The tension in me did not dissipate. It coiled tighter. I had publicly avoided a dish the king had deemed safe. Later, in his chambers, he turned to me. The dessert. It smelled wrong. Not spoiled, chemical, like polish. I tasted nothing but honey and berry. You are not human. The words hung between us, the fundamental, terrifying truth. The wine was obvious. This was different. She knows you taste my food now. She would adapt the weapon. He stared at me. Then he called for Wren and issued a terse command. The cook, Boren, was brought in, trembling. The dessert, Valerius said, his voice dangerously quiet. The lady found its aroma unusual. Explain. Boren fell to his knees. My king! It was only the honey. A new batch, from the western sun meadows. It has a brighter flavor. I swear it. Bring the jar. Now. While we waited, Valerius looked at me. The western sun meadows are known for gold thistle. Its honey is brighter. Almost sharp, a delicacy. Doubt, cold and slick, pooled in my stomach. Had I panicked? Seen shadows where there were only unfamiliar flavors? Wren returned with the nearly empty platter and a small stoneware jar. Valerius opened it, sniffed, tasted. His brow furrowed. He handed it to me. I smelled it. The bright citrus-cleaning scent was there, but fainter, mixed unmistakably with the earthy sweetness of honey. Gold thistle. The heat of humiliation burned my cheeks. I had created an incident over a culinary novelty. Valerius dismissed the weeping Boren. When the door closed, the silence was crushing. I am sorry, I whispered. I was wrong. He didn't respond. He picked up the jar again, studying it. He lifted it to his nose once more, closing his eyes, breathing with a depth no human lung could manage. His eyes snapped open. They were focused on the jar, not the honey. Fetch Silas, and the master mason. Now. When the aged archivist and the stout mason stood before him, Valerius thrust the jar at them. Smell it. Not the honey, the container. The mason, Boren the elder, took it, turned it over, ran a thick thumb over the interior. He paled. My king, this glaze. It is not for food. This is a sealant for porous stone. It contains solvents. Safe when cured, for stone. But to store food in it, especially something acidic like honey. He looked at me, horror dawning. For a Lycan, a trace amount might cause discomfort. For a human, it could seep into the food, cause a slow sickness, paralysis of the gut over days. It would look like a fragile constitution failing. The room tilted. I hadn't been wrong. The poison wasn't in the honey. It was in the vessel. A vessel a Lycan taster would never think to check. Valerius's face was a monument to cold fury. Where did this jar come from? The royal pottery. It is a common type, used for storing nails, pigments, not food. Someone in the kitchens had been given a simple, devastating order. Serve the human's dessert in the wrong jar. No rare poisons. Just a switch of crockery. Valerius looked at me, the fury melting into a respect so profound it was frightening. You were not wrong. You saved your own life. Again. He turned to Wren, his voice glacial. Find the kitchen steward. Find every hand that touched that dish. As Ren vanished, Valerius approached me. She is not trying to kill you with violence, he said, the realization darkening his voice. She is trying to erode you, to make you sick, frail, confused, to make your death a sad, inevitable decline. I looked from the innocent, poisonous jar to his stormy eyes. The battlefield had shifted once more. It was no longer about knives or cut stones. It was about the air, the cup, the very plate I ate from. Isolde was fighting the fact of my humanity, using it as the weapon itself. I met his gaze, the last of my humiliation burning away. Then I will have to become stronger than my weaknesses. The game was in the details, and I was a scribe. Details were my domain.